There is a particular kind of grief that nobody talks about. It is not the grief of losing someone you had. It is the grief of realizing you never had them at all. The grief of understanding that what you called love, what you built your nervous system around, what you stayed up at night rehearsing, what you rewrote yourself for, was never truly extended to you in the way you needed it to be. This is the grief of the unloved child in the adult body. The grief of the person who gave everything and received only breadcrumbs in return, and then, out of hunger, convinced themselves that breadcrumbs were a feast. If you are sitting with this right now, I want you to know something before we go any further. The pain you are feeling is not weakness. It is not pathology. It is the entirely human consequence of having a need that went unmet for so long that you started to believe the need itself was the problem. It was never the need. The architecture of the void psychologists and attachment theorists have spent decades trying to understand what happens to a person when early love is inconsistent, conditional, or simply absent. And what they have found is both heartbreaking and illuminating. When a child reaches out for a caregiver and that reach is not met, not once, not occasionally, but chronically, the brain does something remarkable. It adapts. It learns to suppress the reaching. It learns to interpret unavailability as normal. It begins to create internal working models of what relationships are supposed to look like, and those models, written in the language of survival, say something like, love is something you earn. Love is something you perform for. Love is something that arrives sometimes when you are good enough, quiet enough, useful enough. These are not conscious beliefs. You did not sit down as a 7-year-old and decide to internalize the idea that you are fundamentally unlovable. What happened was far more insidious. It happened in your body, in your nervous system, in the micro moments where you looked for safety and found unpredictability instead. And so the void was created, not as a character flaw, not as a spiritual failing, but as an entirely logical response to an environment that was not safe enough to let your full self exist. The emotional void is not emptiness. That is the first thing I want you to understand. The void feels empty, but it is actually full. Full of old longing, full of deferred grief, full of the version of you that never got to be seen. The strategies that did not save us. When we carry this kind of wound, we do not walk through adulthood passively. We develop strategies. We become extraordinarily skilled at particular things. And those skills, as helpful as they seemed, often end up keeping us from what we actually need. Some of us become hypervigilant readers of other people's moods. We learned early that safety required knowing exactly what emotional weather was coming, so we became experts at detecting the subtle shift in tone, the almost imperceptible tightening of a jaw, the particular silence that meant trouble was near. This skill keeps us exhausted. It keeps us perpetually scanning for danger in relationships that might actually be safe. Some of us became caretakers. We learned that the fastest path to being needed was to make ourselves indispensable. If I take care of you, you cannot leave me. If I absorb your pain, you will see me. And so we became the helpers, the fixers, the ones who always had capacity for everyone else's crisis, and quietly, invisibly ran dry. Some of us became chameleons. We watched the people we longed for and relearned what they seemed to want. And we became that. We became very, very good at performing a version of ourselves that felt lovable. And in doing so, we lost track of what we actually were underneath the performance. And some of us, perhaps the most painful category, became experts at pursuing the unavailable. Because the nervous system that was trained in an environment of inconsistent love has been calibrated to read emotional distance as desire. The person who keeps their heart just out of reach feels like the right kind of love because it mirrors the template we were given. The anxious chase feels like passion. The coldness feels like depth. The withdrawal feels like mystery. None of these were choices made in weakness. All of them made perfect sense in the original context. The problem is that we carried them into contexts where they no longer served us. What we tell ourselves about the void. There is a story that many of us tell ourselves about the emotional void. And it goes something like this. If I could just find the right person, the right relationship, the right level of love from the outside, the void would be filled. And so we pour ourselves into relationships. We stay in relationships that are not good for us because leaving would mean sitting alone with the void, and that feels unsurvivable. We fall too fast and love too hard. We mistake intensity for intimacy. We confuse someone's need for us with someone's love for us. We also sometimes tell ourselves the opposite story. The void cannot be filled. I am too broken. I have been damaged in ways that are permanent. This is depression's particular lie, that the wound is the whole of you, that there is no self outside the absence. Both stories are false, and they are both, in their own way, ways of avoiding the real work. The real work is not finding someone to fill the void. The real work is learning to tolerate being with yourself in it, and then gradually filling it from the inside. This is not a romantic idea. It does not feel good at first. It requires a particular kind of courage that nobody talks about enough. The courage to stop outsourcing your sense of worth to other people's responses to you. The psychology of self-reparenting there is a concept in therapeutic work called reparenting. It is not about pretending your childhood did not happen. It is not about toxic positivity or deciding to be grateful for the wound. It is about identifying the developmental needs that were not met and finding ways, as an adult, to meet them. This requires first understanding what those needs were. Did you need to be seen, truly seen, without having to perform or shrink? Many of us needed a parent who could look at us with genuine curiosity and say, "Who are you, specifically? What do you feel? What do you love?" Not with an agenda for who we were supposed to become, but with actual interest in who we already were. Did you need consistency? A nervous system that was raised in inconsistency is perpetually braced for the floor to drop out. It cannot rest because it has learned that rest is dangerous, that the moment you relax is the moment the ground shifts. If you needed consistency and did not get it, part of your healing involves creating environments and eventually relationships that are reliable enough to begin to retrain that expectation. Did you need someone to hold your emotions without flinching? Many of us were raised in homes where our feelings were either dismissed, pathologized, or answered with someone else's anxiety. We learned that our inner world was too much, too inconvenient, too overwhelming, and so we learned to suppress it, or to perform only the emotions that were acceptable. Point self-reparenting asks, what would it look like to give those things to yourself now? This is not about becoming self-sufficient in a way that walls you off from others. Human beings are wired for connection. We cannot heal in isolation. But it is about developing an internal caregiver, a part of you that can witness your own pain without catastrophizing it, that can hold your feelings without needing them to be different, that can offer you consistency in the form of values, rhythms, and commitments to yourself that do not waver based on whether someone else approves of you that day. Grief as medicine. One of the most counterintuitive truths of this kind of healing is that grief is not the obstacle. Grief is the path. When we realize that love was never extended to us the way we needed, there is a natural impulse to either collapse into that grief or to skip over it entirely, to go straight to the therapeutic insight, the framework, the action plan, because feeling it fully seems too dangerous. But unfelt grief does not disappear. It metabolizes into anxiety, into rage turned inward, into the compulsive pursuit of things that promise to make the absence stop hurting. It comes out sideways, in the relationship you cannot leave that is making you smaller, in the rage you feel at someone who loves you imperfectly, when what you are actually feeling is grief for a love you needed as a child and did not receive. To grieve the love that was never yours is to do something profoundly radical. It is to acknowledge that you deserved it. That is the part that makes people stop, because many of us, underneath all our striving and performing and vigilance, carry the deep suspicion that we did not deserve it, that the unavailability of love was a verdict on our worth, that the conditional nature of the love we received was accurate information about who we were. It was not. The absence of love from someone who could not or would not give it is information about them, about their wounds, their limitations, their own unfilled voids. It was never a verdict on you. To grieve fully is to feel the loss of what you needed and never got, and to let that loss be real and to not immediately try to fix or explain it away. It is to say, that child deserved better. I deserved better. And the fact that it did not come does not mean it was not owed to me. This kind of grief, when you let yourself feel it, is not endless. It moves. Grief that is felt does not persist in the same way that grief that is suppressed does. It comes in waves, and the waves gradually become less violent, and eventually, not always, not completely, but meaningfully, you find yourself standing on steadier ground, filling the void. What actually works, I want to be honest with you here, because you deserve honesty more than you deserve comfort. There is no single thing that fills the emotional void. There is no relationship, no spiritual practice, no therapeutic technique, no amount of self-help content that constitutes the finish line. What there is, instead, is a gradual accumulation of experiences that begin to rewrite the story your nervous system tells about who you are and whether you are safe. Let me tell you what that accumulation looks like. It looks like learning to be a witness to your own inner life. This is the practice of noticing what you feel without immediately judging it, suppressing it, or performing it for someone else's benefit. It means developing the capacity to sit with your own experience, even when that experience is painful, even when it is inconvenient, even when it does not make you look good, and to simply say, "This is what is happening in me right now." Therapy, when it is good therapy, does this. A skilled therapist does not fix you. They are a consistent, non-judgmental presence in whose company you gradually learn that your inner world is not too much, that your feelings are not catastrophic, that you can be known and not rejected. And in experiencing that consistently, over time, the nervous system begins to revise its expectations. It looks like building relationships, not just romantic relationships, but friendships, communities, working relationships, that are characterized by mutuality. Mutuality means that care flows in both directions, that your needs are considered alongside the other person's needs, that you are not always the one giving and never the one receiving. Many of us who were raised in emotionally depriving environments have never actually experienced this. The relationships we were trained in were asymmetrical. We gave, they received, or they were chaotic, or they came with conditions. Mutuality feels strange at first. It can even feel boring because there is no chase, no drama, no adrenaline. But boring, in this context, is not a red flag. Boring is what safety feels like before you have learned to trust it. It looks like developing a relationship with your body. The emotional void is not only a psychological phenomenon, it is a somatic one. The longing that was never met lives in your chest, in the tightening of your throat, in the way you brace your shoulders without noticing. Practices that bring you back into contact with your physical self, movement, breath, time and nature. Practices that ask you to be present in your body, rather than always living above the neck in thought, are not peripheral to this healing. They are central to it. It looks like building a life that has inherent meaning to you, independent of whether anyone is watching. This is perhaps the most powerful long-term inoculation against the void, a life that you find genuinely interesting, that engages your curiosity, that reflects your values and not just your performance of acceptability. When your sense of self is grounded in what you care about, what you are building, what matters to you, rather than in the continuous project of securing someone else's approval, you become less dependent on external validation for your sense of okayness. And it looks like learning slowly and imperfectly to let imperfect love. And because here's the thing about healing, it does not end with self-sufficiency. It ends with a new kind of openness, one that is not desperate, not frantic, not driven by the terror of the void, but one that can genuinely receive care when it is genuinely offered. The goal is not to need no one. The goal is to be able to recognize real love when it comes, love that is consistent, love that can handle your full self, love that does not ask you to perform, and to let it matter, and to let it land without immediately sabotaging it because it does not have the familiar texture of the painful love you were trained for. A word about the people who could not love you before we close. I want to say something about the people who were not able to give you what you needed. This is not an invitation to minimize what they did or did not do. It is not an invitation to excuse the ways their behavior harmed you. You are allowed to be angry. You are allowed to grieve. You are allowed to set limits on how much access they have to your life now. But it may be useful, not for their sake, but for yours, to understand that the people who were unable to love you well were almost certainly carrying their own unfilled voids. The parent who was emotionally unavailable likely never learned what emotional availability looked like. The partner who withheld love likely learned somewhere along the way that closeness was dangerous. The person who gave you conditional love likely received conditional love themselves, and passed it on without even knowing they were doing so. This does not mean the wound they gave you is your responsibility to carry quietly. It means that what happened to you was not personal in the way it felt personal. It was not an accurate measure of your lovability. It was the sad, self-perpetuating logic of unhealed pain being transmitted from one generation to the next. You have the opportunity, which is also a responsibility, and also a gift, to be the one who stops the transmission. To be the one who does the uncomfortable, unglamorous, profound work of healing it in your own body, so that it does not continue its journey through you into the next relationship, or the next generation, or the next version of you that might otherwise stay small. The life on the other side, I want to end by telling you something about what is possible. Not as a promise, not as a guarantee, but as a genuine account of what happens to people who do this work, in therapy rooms and in quiet internal practice, and in relationships that are slowly getting healthier. What becomes possible is this: you begin to take up the space you were born to take up. You stop shrinking. You stop performing. You stop scanning the room to see if you are okay by reading whether everyone else seems okay with you. You begin to know what you feel, and to trust it as information rather than as a problem to be managed. You begin to recognize the difference between intensity and intimacy, between chemistry and compatibility, between the familiar and the healthy. You begin to be able to receive, to let someone's kindness land without immediately dismissing it, or distrusting it, or feeling that you need to repay it immediately to stay in balance. You begin, and this is the deepest thing, to feel at home in yourself. Not all the not perfectly. But increasingly, in quiet moments, you notice that the ground beneath you is more stable than it used to be. That the void, while it may not be entirely gone, no longer feels like it is the whole of your interior landscape. That there is something else there too, something patient, something curious, something that knows you and does not leave. That something is you. It has always been you. The work of healing is simply the work of finding your way back to yourself, to the self that was there before the love that was never really yours convinced you that you are not worth returning to. You are. You always were. And the most important love story of your life is the one you are in the process of beginning. Not with another person, but with the self you have been waiting all this time to meet.